In this video, I'm going to show you start to finish exactly how I create animations using Blender and HumanGen. First thing I do, I've got my character from HumanGen, just threw that right in there. Super easy, super simple. It's an add-on, not sponsored. It's just really great. I use it more than I use Daz or Character Creator just because it's right there in Blender. The other thing is I have some assets from Polyhaven, which is another great asset. Again, not sponsored, but they're really great, constantly updated and free to use assets that are made by them. So they're normally pretty nice. And here, I'm basically just trying to get like a pose down, trying to figure out what I want the character to be doing. I have this reference from Pinterest where it's sort of like all these different characters sort of like coming around one central character, which is kind of fun. And so I then go with my camera to sort of like block out a single scene. I've noticed some other designers doing this as well, and it just helps you to understand like where you want to focus on. And by setting up the camera early, you ultimately save a lot of time, both in you making it, but also computer speed, render speed. Just getting that camera down early, it really helps you. And then also you get to focus on composition as well. So like keeping that camera there at the beginning is definitely important. And then I just threw some lighting and some more terrain in there, and that just, again, really helps with the overall composition. So from there, I really just start to try and identify these character poses that I want to be doing. I haven't worked with more than 3 characters before, so this was definitely an interesting challenge. I think ultimately I go with like 7, but it's definitely a challenge to try and like pose and animate all of them at the same time. But it was definitely worth it, I think, in the final render. It was a lot of fun. And I think as I'm coming along here, I'm noticing, obviously working with the bones in the model and stuff, but I'm noticing that the interaction between the background characters and the main character is a really nice aspect for different animation points that I can focus on later. So I'm taking note of those. The other thing is I'm starting at frame 0 in a T pose, like the character's arms are all out, in case I want to add clothes to the models later in Marvelous Designer. Definitely not for any other reason than that. And then here I am trying to play with so yeah, I'm just posing the character in the back here. I'm noticing that it's really nice to have these characters sort of like come together and interact, and those would be great scenes for later on in the animation. I think I keep looking back at my reference, and I'm noticing different little things, like how subtly the characters in the background are like latched on to the center character. And because I know that I won't be focusing on the back, I'm not too worried if the characters are intersecting at all. But what I am noticing that I'm excited for, and I'll go into it later on in the animation, is that the characters touching, or the characters like getting close, is potentially a really cool scene. So I'm taking note of that and trying to make sure that I at least have some really decent poses for those moments there. And so I've got it all together. And one thing that I learned in art school and painting was if you ever get to a point where like something becomes tedious, or you're like not sure of something, definitely take a moment to start working on other things and just like try to work your way around the canvas or like the composition that you're working on. It just ultimately like keeps the flow there rather than getting stuck on one thing, especially if it's like really time consuming. Like this, so this is like the background. This is just a sky texture from Unsplash, super simple, and it's real, so it looks really nice. And because there's rocks in the image, it flows really nicely with the rocks, the rock terrain that we're using. So that was really nice. The water is a model that I made for myself, but it was using Max Hay tutorial where he talks about how to make realistic water. Just throw it into your asset browser and like you never have to worry about like going back through those nodes or like, you know, it just saves a ton of time whenever you like make one thing and then you get to come back to it. I've been thinking about doing that for characters and character clothes and stuff like that as well. And then here I am, I'm working on this fourth character and I'm kind of trying to figure out how to pose it correctly and like come around the side, and it's all sort of like this, you know, fluid, this sort of like fluid motion. It does it does take me a second to like figure out how I want the legs to be, because before they were all sort of like mystical, and I think as I get lower and lower and further into the back, I try to make it seem like it's the characters are being held up by the last few, which doesn't really matter too much. Obviously, it's kind of like mystical and magical anyway, but it's good for like continuity and just like when people look at it. If people look at it closely enough, at least you can say that you have some sort of realistic element going on, and you know that added touch too ultimately makes, you know, a better composition and better artwork overall. The other thing I'm trying to keep in mind here is headspace, because I want to add bones or like animal skulls onto each of these characters. So I'm trying to make sure that I'm giving them enough space around the head so that I can fit that on later. But it's, you know, just trying to get the overall look down first. And this part's really interesting because I'm coming in here and I'm trying to get this pose down, but what I thought was cool is making it seem more like she's sideways. So I turn it and then start realizing that I can do it with the pose too. But ultimately you really don't even like see her at all. But I think she actually adds a lot, because it's just like she's filling in that gap between the arm and the last character, and it just adds a little bit more there. And even though ultimately you can't really see too much of her, it's just like filling in those gaps is really nice. And so I'm in here trying to pose, trying to make sure I have everything right. One thing I have noticed with Human Gen, and it's probably the same for a lot of other characters, is, one, you have to press A to highlight all the bones after you've moved them all, and then keyframe them. At least that's how I do it. You can keyframe them each individually, but just be super careful that you're not like tabbing in between frames or like looking at anything, because you will lose the entire pose. So like right there, I have the whole pose down, and then I keyframe it and like try and like see where everything goes. And this kind of goes back into what I was saying with the hands like intermingling with the other characters. I think that adds a lot to it. You know, they're not like individual, just like assets that are placed. You know, they're all kind of like hanging on to one another, and I think that adds a lot to it. And thankfully, because I chose the top-down light, you can't really see what's going on with the legs, and the legs are all like intersecting and looking weird. But it looks okay when it's like in shadow and stuff like that. But with the and then here I finally go into the lighting. I think ultimately I wanted to try and do it with one light, and it would have been fine with this one light. But what I realized was that this backlighting with the rim light looked really, really nice. So I wanted to keep it, and so I'm toggling on and off to like see which one is better, and I ultimately decided to go with both, and I think it works really nicely. Especially with, if you notice the character on the right, and even the character on the left too, they both have like this face light that looks really nice with the rim. So I think that worked out okay. And then for this, I actually made both the characters taller, because I was thinking like, if I'm going to have them holding up all these people together, you know, realistically or unrealistically, they could at least look a little tougher, a little stronger, a little bigger, really. So that was kind of cool too. Again, still kind of struggling with moving around the bones and posing everything. And I'm pressing G and R for a lot of those. If you were to use Rigify, you could use like the IK rig, and they would like all move independently of each other. And looking back on this, that probably would have saved a lot of time. So I'll probably do that in the future. Use like a rig, which I think comes with the Human Gen add-on. You can like change the whole rig to IK, which is, you know, just another benefit of using it. So I'm in here, and for this, what is that, the 6th character, I'm trying to figure out how I can make it look like she's kind of holding these guys up, but she's also like really interested in whatever mystical ritual is going on here. But I also want her to be involved, basically, but also holding up the entire crew. So I'm trying to pose the hand like that, while also trying to make sure that the mesh isn't like twerked into the wrong position. Because if you can kind of notice with the leg, and a little bit with the arm there too, it's like the bone is like over rotated, and it looks like it wouldn't be possible. So ultimately it's fine. And again, I come back around with the other arm to make it look as though she's kind of using the other guy who's holding on to the main figure for leverage, which again, that's really, stuff like that is really important for 3D, because you want it to make it believable, but you don't have to worry about realism too much. You just want to make it seem as though it could be possible. So I work on that. Again, I make this guy oversized, so it kind of looks like he could also hold up all these people, and I turn his body initially, and I'm not really too worried about the overall like T-pose, because I think at this point I had decided I wasn't going to use any clothes from MD because the posing had taken so long. But I was really happy with how this one turned out specifically, because being bigger and lengthier, there's more you can do with the limbs, there's more you can do with the pose. And so I'm in here trying to figure that out, and then I think eventually I noticed that his shoulders need to be just like turned a lot more inward, so that hand can come around. But it ultimately it works out for the best. And I don't know what to do with his legs either, so I come in and like fold them up basically, and then like just rotate them down to again try and sell the idea that he could potentially be squatting with all these people. But it's not super important that he's like realistically like squatting and like holding all these people together. It just ultimately it just kind of looks better to make it a smidge more believable. Even though the legs are all like intersecting in weird ways. Um, but yeah, so I've rotated the shoulders. The arms come down. One cool thing about this character specifically was that his arms were so long, he was able to come around the central figure and sort of like weave through the middle, which was really cool. Again, just adding that extra layer of detail just really sells it ultimately. So these are the bone masks. I got these from Sketchfab. I've used them quite a few times. They're an old asset. They're low poly, but I think they're real textures, like real photoscan texture. So they're pretty nice. And so I'm in here trying to pose it, trying to come up with the idea for what I want the bones to be like doing and how they're going to be shaped on the skull. I thought it would be easier, but I didn't really like how the bones were intersecting with the character model as much. Again, I was trying to hit on that believability somewhat more, but ultimately I kind of just decided like, it looks better to have the model in the head area, kind of like on it. So I'm in here trying to figure out how I want to edit the skull potentially. Again, I was trying to place it like on the top of the head, but I wasn't really sure. Again, I have this really, really cool reference from, I'm going to totally butcher this name, but I think it's Sad Mojays or Monjosi. I don't know. I'll link it in below. It's wicked cool. And it's all these bone masks dancing with motion capture data like a Renaissance painting. It's wicked awesome. But that's the reference I'm using, and I'm trying to figure out how I can do something similar here. And these masks, I'm going back and forth between the reference and the masks that I have, and some of the skulls work well and some of them don't. So I'm just trying to figure out the balance there between them. I got really attached to these the deer skull, and that was really cool. I just like it. So I was trying to figure out how I can fit the deer skull on top of the large dude, because I thought that made sense. Big dude, big weird skull with horns or antlers. So I don't know. Ultimately, it didn't work, and I was just like, okay, well, I'm gonna move on. But it's I think it works again for the most part. It gets the job done. I'm not getting too close in between these ultimately, and at the end of the animation, I decide that it looks really cool whenever they intersect in the right way, and we'll get more into like how I animate it, but I think it's it comes down to like your style and preference, but if you can wow the audience with a like moment of like, oh wow, I didn't expect that, especially in animation when things tend to be so perfect and like so right, and we're constantly worried about the right physics and look and everything. You can actually get further and wow people more when things aren't the right way, when things kind of like are unexpected, basically. So like with a skull mask, you could never in reality put a skull through a person's face. I mean like you could with like the proper like materials and VFX, like practical effects and stuff like that, but as we get into it, it's really interesting to have the skull bones intersecting with the character mesh. So I take that into consideration and ultimately decide to just leave it. um, but no, I think it's fine ultimately. And then here I am trying to figure out math for these characters. I'm awful at math. I don't know if you're awful at math, but I'm awful at math. And adding 30 frames at the beginning was a nightmare for me because I basically have all the frame sets memorized between 30 and 24. So yeah, this totally messed me up. But of course, I ultimately figured it out and realized that the proper frame rate or the proper amount of frames to use is 120 because I want 4 sections out of this whole thing. So I cut it into 4s. Then I realized I was really going for like a slow motion effect, and I'm really interested in title sequences. So with the slow motion effect, I was like, this could be really, really interesting if we're looking at all these characters like very, very slowly coming onto the central figure. And so it's not hard to do once you have like a point in the pose that you want, and it's because we keyframed it all at the same frame. It's just super easy to then highlight all those keys, the keyframes, especially in the graph editor, and then just move them frame by frame. I do that all the time. That's probably one of the bigger things that I do is I'll just keyframe the entire thing and then go in and move it to whichever new frame that I want it to be at. So, yeah, I thought that worked pretty well. I do this, again, I'm still going back and forth about the intersecting of the skulls, but I think ultimately it's not a big deal, and I switch it back anyway. I think here is probably one of the only moments that I'm like really unsure of what I'm doing. So I come in here and like I said, the whole idea is that these characters are like coming in, crowding around the central figure so that they're like, basically the ritual is that the mask is coming on to the character, and the central figure is going to be like the other characters. That's just what I said in my head, I guess. And so the skull is like slowly kind of like growing out of him. And again, I think it's really cool because it looks weird, and weird normally does well. And the skull is just like coming out of his face, which, you know, kind of works for this. But here, like I said, I really like title sequences, and a really common trend right now, at least, in title sequences is sort of like this really long frame, or this really long scene that just like goes on and on and on. The Last of Us, that just won an Emmy, if you realize, is actually one just super long take with all these different like effects happening all at the same time, which is really, really cool. And so here I'm trying to do it, and I think I animate one camera, and then I animate the camera empty to kind of like guide it and like sit with it. And then I realize that it's just too long, and it's too much camera movement. It's kind of like jarring how it goes from like side to side to side to front. And so I'm still trying to mess with it because I know that I can at least get some scenes away from this. And I really like that shot where you can only see hands coming over the character, because that really tells the story of what's going on. You know, all these characters again are reaching around to the central figure. So because we started off with the central frame. I know that I want to start there, or I want to end there, in that last frame with all the terrain and the background and everything. And I know for a fact that I want to start at least with the character. Again, I have another reference where I think this is really common in photography, where it has a really low depth of field, and everything else is like really blurred out. It's pretty stylized, but it looks really nice right now. And just having the way that the face is sitting on this character, it looks really nice right here. So I knew that I wanted to keep that for sure. And then now I'm going in to try and figure out how I can still try to make this slow motion while switching in between each of the cameras. And so I basically start with with the camera I just made, and then I go in and I try not to waste anything. So I have basically in my mind figured out the shots that I want to use, and now I just have to figure out how to get there and how to make them more interesting through this aspect. So the way that I do that with this first one is I start off with the skull that's again going through the skin, and I know that if I mess around with the materials and stuff and the speed of the skull, I can make it look less weird and a little bit more stylized and interesting with the motion and again the materials that I use. So I've got the first frame down, or the first scene. Now I'm trying to figure out what I want this second shot to be, and I remember from the beginning that I really, really liked how the hand was getting close to the central figure. So with that, I'm moving on to the second frame, or the second shot. I am really interested in the sort of like motion that comes with the hand getting really close to the character, the central character. And then I notice that the eyes of this background character are also focusing down onto the central character. And so I think that's a really interesting shot, especially going back into the sort of like unrealistic believability of this whole animation. It just really makes a lot of sense with the way that we're framing this. You know, the characters are coming in and they're trying to morph or change the central character into having like a bone mask like they do. And ultimately what I decide is that this whole thing can look really nice if I have the hand coming down. And again, I eventually decide as well to rotate that mask back around. And like, I think you can still see the eyes, maybe not, but you still see the face is like centered on the main character. And so that shows the intent, and that shows the sort of like believability of the whole thing. And I like to do this too, where I have the shots going in and out of each other, and so that really helps you to like get the flow and the understanding of it all. To help with that, I normally have the camera's interpolation for each shot to be set at linear, and that's just like a totally straight shot. Normally, that helps. You can do so much. I highly suggest you play around with the graph editor if you're interested in this, but definitely do other things besides linear interpolation. I think just for this animation and what I'm going for, it helps to sell the overall like continual shot. It doesn't like really break anything up because it's just constantly going. And sometimes I'll even go as far as if the camera's turning left or right with the linear interpolation, I'll try to even make the next shot turning from left to right. And again, because we have the cameras focusing, the cameras have a tracking object, the tracking empty, it just makes it so much easier. So I highly recommend that. And then here I am. Again, I already knew what I wanted for that third shot, which was all the hands kind of like coming together onto the central figure. So that was a no-brainer. Super simple. And then obviously the last shot was the one that we've been working on the whole time. So ultimately, I had this whole thing down. And again, tried not to waste that beginning animation that I was trying to work on. Here, I'm thinking it's really cool to add in like the skin, this sort of like skin changing from regular white Caucasian skin to like the sort of like alien, well, not alien, but like mystic, sort of like fantasy, I don't know, clay skin. That's also white. But yeah, just changing it in that little direction just adds a lot to it. So ultimately, that's what I decided. I'll show the final animation here at the end. But yeah, thanks for listening. Comment down below if you have any questions or concerns. If you like this type of video, let me know. Give it a like. Thank you for sitting through 30 minutes of me talking. And let me know. I'll try to reply to every single question. Okay, have a great day.